What if I told you there's a 2-mana commander released back in 2017 that can single-handedly shut down every creature-based deck at the table? This deck would make Samuel L. Jackson go absolutely crazy. Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons. Even though Hapatra was released more than 8 years ago, she still holds up as one of the most oppressive value engines that Golgari has ever seen. This simple 2-mana commander gives you an insane amount of board control and value generation. Anytime she deals combat damage to a player, you get to put a -1/-1 counter on any creature. A perfect way to deal with any mana dorks or any small value creatures your opponents might control. So long as per Sentinel and Loto. Now I know what you're thinking. Getting combat damage through isn't always that reliable because opponents will usually be able to block her. But remember, Hapatra will come down as early as turn 2 and your opponents will still be busy setting up their own mana rocks and mana dorks, meaning you'll almost always get at least 1 or 2 triggers out of this ability before your opponents even have the time to react to this. And the -1/-1 counter ability scales perfectly with Haptra's real source of power, being her second ability. Whenever you'd place a -1/-1 counter on any creature, you get to create a 1/1 green snake token with deathtouch. That means whenever you hit someone with Haptra, cast any of your removal spells, or trigger any other -1/-1 counter effect, you'll automatically start flooding the board with 1/1 deathtouch snakes. And those snake tokens turn combat into a real nightmare for any of your opponents, because trying to make favorable trades against any sort of deathtouch creature is basically impossible. And the snakes aren't just there to make combat awkward, because under all that value and control, this deck hides an insane amount of combo potential. There are multiple infinite loops built directly into Haptra's mechanics, and these combos go from anywhere between generating infinite mana, flooding the board with a huge army of deathtouch snakes, or just draining out all your opponents at once. Despite being from an older set and using a forgotten mechanic, Haptra proves that -1/-1 counters are still a really relevant archetype in modern day Magic. The fact that you're generating value by removing your opponent's creatures or debuffing them will always be a rock solid strategy. And this deck really thrives in creature heavy play groups. The more creatures there are in play, the more targets you have to put -1/-1 counters on and the more value you'll be able to generate. If your opponents rely on using mana dorks or some small value creatures, this deck will eat them alive. And just wait until we get to the combo section later in the video. That's where I'll be showing how all the pieces in this deck really connect. I even took the time to write a really in-depth primer over on Moxfield where every single combo in this deck is explained in detail. You can find the link in the description below, and it honestly is one of the most extensive primers I have ever written. As I do in all my videos, I will be going over every single card that's included in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up in 8 categories. The -1/-1 Counter Synergies, Acceleration, the Drain and Wincons, Support, Card Draw, Protection and Interaction, the Lands, and in the end a combo section where I will be going over every single combo we play in the deck. Let's get started by going over the -1/-1 Counter Synergies we play in this deck. These cards are the absolute backbone of the deck that will enable us to spread our -1/-1 counters to any creature on the board. These cards turn this Haptra deck into a full-blown control machine, because we will easily be able to deal with any creatures our opponents might play, and we will be generating a ton of snake tokens in the process. And let's get started by talking about a card that's arguably the best way to put a ton of -1/-1 counters on every creature on the board. Black Sun's Zenith. For 2 black mana plus X, you get to put X -1/-1 counters on each creature on the battlefield. And the value this card will generate you whenever you have Haptra on the battlefield is absolutely insane. Because let's say there are 10 total creatures on the battlefield and you just cast a spell for 3 mana, all of those creatures will get a single -1/-1 counter. Haptra will then trigger a total of 10 times and she will generate you 10 1/1 deathtouch tokens in the process, on top of already removing most of your opponent's creatures or just debuffing them with the -1/-1 counters. Even if Haptra would die and leave the battlefield due to the effect of Black Sun Zenith, you will still get the triggers and you will still get to create the snake tokens. And obviously later in the game you can invest more mana into the X and you can use Black Sun Zenith as an actual board wipe. And after you resolve Black Sun Zenith, it just shuffles back into your library instead of going to your graveyard, so you can draw into it again on a later turn, or you can just tutor it up again to get a ton more -1/-1 counters. Contagion Clasp. Whenever this little 2 mana artifact enters the battlefield, we get to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, which will generate you a snake thanks to Hapatra, and you can use this effect to remove any small value creature or mana dork your opponents might have, or just debuff any of their creatures. And for 4 mana and tapping this artifact, we get to proliferate, meaning we get to pick any number of creatures or players that already have a sort of counter on themselves and then give them an additional kind of that counter. Proliferate is obviously a really strong mechanic in this type of deck. If you have a couple of -1/-1 counters on some creatures your opponents control, you can just proliferate, give them additional counter, get some additional Hapatra triggers, generate some snakes, and debuff their creatures even more. And once you have enough -1/-1 counters on them, the creatures will just be removed. Devoted Druid. For 2 mana, you get a mana dork that you can tap to add 1 green mana to your mana pool. And it also has an activated ability that you can put a -1/-1 counter on this creature on instant speed to just untap it. And due to this creature having 2 toughness, this means you can tap it for mana, put a -1/-1 counter on it, untap it, and tap it again. Essentially giving you a 2 mana dork that you can use to add 2 mana to your mana pool. And obviously every time you do use her ability, you will get to generate a deathtouch snake token. Now, not only is Devoted Druid already a really good match for this type of deck, we actually use it in a ton of our infinite combos. I will be going over these in the combo section later in the video. Bane Whip Punisher. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to put a -1/-1 counter on any creature. A really solid way to get a free Hapatra trigger and get a free snake token. And for 1 black mana and sacrificing this creature, we get to destroy any creature on the battlefield that has a -1/-1 counter on it, giving you a really reliable way to deal with any huge toughness creatures that your opponents might control. Blowfly Infestation. Whenever this 3-mana enchantment is on the battlefield and any creature would be put into a graveyard that had a -1/-1 counter on it, you get to put a -1/-1 counter on any creature. And this effect is obviously insane whenever you combine it with Hapatra. I will be going more in depth in the combo section, but just let me give you an example of how it works. Let's say you have this enchantment, Hapatra, and a 1/1 snake token on the battlefield, and you are able to put a -1/-1 counter on the snake token. Hapatra will then trigger and she will generate you a new snake token. The old snake token will die and it will hit the graveyard. This will trigger your Blowfly Infestation and you will be able to put a new -1/-1 counter on the new snake you just created. From there, the loop will just repeat and you will get an infinite amount of snake tokens entering and leaving the battlefield. And as you will see in a later section, we do have a ton of cards in the deck that will translate this loop into an instant game win. Grim Affliction. For 3 mana on instant speed, we get to put a -1/-1 counter on any target creature and then we get to proliferate. Baseline, if you don't already have any -1 counters on the board, this card will grant you at least 2 snake tokens with Hapatra. But whenever you do already have -1/-1 counters on some creatures on the board, you can just proliferate them, and for each counter you will get an extra snake token. Really crazy value for just a 3 mana card that already acts as some sort of a removal spell, and just an additional way to trigger any of the -1 counter synergies we play in the deck and get a ton more snakes out. Necroskitter, a 3 mana 1/4 body with the Wither mechanic. And Wither basically means that this creature will deal damage in the form of -1/-1 counters. So whenever this creature gets into combat with something, it won't deal 1 damage, but instead it will give the creature it just fought a -1/-1 counter, which in this deck is way better than actually dealing damage. And whenever a creature an opponent controls with a -1/-1 counter would be put into a graveyard, we get the option to return it to the battlefield under our control. Now, as you've already seen, we will easily be able to dish out a ton of counters onto any creatures our opponents might control. Whenever these creatures then hit 0 toughness or they die for any other reason, we will just get them back on our side of the board. Just imagine having a Necroskitter on the battlefield and then casting a huge Black Sun Zenith, clearing all your opponent's boards. boss. You will then just get all their creatures under your control, and usually this is more than enough to just win the game on the spot. Nest of Scarabs. This card is basically Hapatra if she would be an enchantment. Whenever you'd put any number of -1/-1 counters on a creature, you get to create that many 1/1 black insect tokens, allowing us to double up on the value that Hapatra already generates us, or serving as a really good backup plan for when Hapatra isn't available to us. The tokens won't have deathtouch, but honestly it doesn't matter that much. The value on this card is still fantastic. And we also use this card in a ton of our infinite combo lines in the deck, basically as some sort of a Hapatra replacement. Spitting Dilophosaurus. Whenever this 3-mana creature enters the battlefield or it attacks, we get to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, giving us some immediate value whenever it enters the battlefield and guaranteeing us a free Hapatra trigger on future turns whenever we attack with it. And passively, all creatures your opponents control that have a -1 counter on them can't block. And this little ability actually synergizes really well with Haptara's first ability. You can just swing with both Haptara and this dinosaur. The dinosaur will trigger before you go to blockers. Just put the -1/-1 counter on any blockers your opponents might have, and this will essentially guarantee that Haptara will get combat damage through, and you will get an additional -1/-1 counter. And yes, using a Black Sun Zenith to put a -1/-1 counter on any creature will just make your entire board unblockable. Harbinger of Night. Sadly, this card doesn't have an immediate impact whenever you play it, but the value it will generate you on future turns is just beyond broken, acting pretty much in the same way as a 3-mana Black Sun Zenith at the beginning of every one of your upkeeps. You'll just be stacking counters on every creature on the board, and eventually they will die to those effects. And whenever this triggers and you do control Haptara, per creature on the board you will get to generate a deathtouch snake token. Massacre Girl, Known Killer, a 4-mana menace creature that will give all creatures you control the Wither mechanic. Although your opponents won't really be likely to block any of the snake tokens you control due to the deathtouch, whenever you have this card on the battlefield, now whenever your snakes do deal damage, they will put a -1/-1 counter on something, and they will just generate you new snakes in the process, making combat even more awkward for your opponents. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies and its toughness was less than 1, we get to draw a card. This ability was obviously designed with -1/-1 counters and the Wither mechanic in mind. Because for example, lightning bolting a creature won't make it go to 0 toughness and it won't trigger Massacre Girl. But for example, casting a Black Sun Zenith will put -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures. If they have more counters on them than they have toughness, they will essentially die with 0 toughness, allowing you to draw like a gazillion cards of Massacre Girl. Soul Snuffers, a 4-mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will put a -1 counter on each creature on the battlefield, essentially functioning as a Harbinger of the Night, but this time the creature will have an immediate impact and it is only a one-time effect. Whenever you cast this card, you essentially get a 4-mana 2/2 body and a free Black Sun Zenith for 1 mana, which in turn will produce you a huge amount of snakes, and it will debuff or remove all your opponent's creatures. Wickerbow Elder. This 4-mana creature will enter the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on itself, already generating us 1 snake token whenever we play it. And for 1 green mana and removing a -1 counter from this creature, we get to destroy target artifact or enchantment, making this into a really solid interaction piece to deal with any problematic enchantments or artifacts your opponents might control, be it a Rhystic Study, a Smothering Tide, an Aura Shards, whatever. And since we can easily start stacking additional -1 counters onto this creature, we can use this ability a ton of times, and it actually turns into a repeatable effect. And now let's get into the single best card in this entire Hapatra deck, Yawgmoth, Tran Physician. For 4 mana you get a 2/4 body with protection from humans. You can also pay 2 black mana and discard a card to proliferate, a pretty solid little ability to just dish out additional -1 counters and get additional snakes. But the real reason why this card is absolutely broken when combined with Hapatra is the other activated ability. By paying 1 life and sacrificing a creature, we get to put a -1/-1 counter on any creature and we get to draw a card. Yawgmoth plus Hapatra is essentially an almost infinite 2-card loop. I'll be going more in depth into this in the combo section, but just let me give you a quick example of how it works. Let's say you have Yawgmoth, Hapatra and a snake token on the battlefield. You can then pay 1 life and sacrifice your snake token. This will allow you to draw a card and put a -1/-1 counter on any creature your opponents might control. Hapatra will then trigger and you will get to generate a new snake token, which you can then again sacrifice, dish out another -1/-1 counter, draw an additional card and get a new snake token. And from here you can just keep looping this effect for as long as you do have the life available and for as long as your opponents have creatures on the battlefield. This combo is essentially some sort of a soft lock on your opponents playing any creatures, because every time they do control a creature you just sacrifice another snake, put enough counters on it to remove it, and you will get to draw a ton of cards in the process. Just these 2 cards alone aren't really an infinite loop, because eventually we will run out of life to pay for its ability, and eventually we will just have cleared the entire board and we won't have any targets to put -1/-1 counters on anymore. But in the combo section I will be going over the cards we can use to turn this card into an actual infinite loop that will win us the game on the spot. Flourishing Defenses, a 5 mana enchantment that has exactly the same effect as Hapatra and a Nest of Scarabs. Whenever we put a -1/-1 counter on a creature, we get to create a 1/1 green elf warrior token. Another card that allows us to just double up on the value of any -1/-1 counters we put on things, or that serves as a really good backup for when we don't have Hapatra available to us. Persistent Constrictor, one of my favorite little pet cards in the entire deck. For 5 mana you get a 5/3 body that at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep will make them lose 1 life, and you get to put a -1/-1 counter on any creature that opponent controls. This card essentially guarantees us that every time that we pass our turn and it sticks to the battlefield, we will get at least 3 deathtouch snake tokens by the time it's our turn again. And trust me, whenever you are playing this Hapatra deck, your opponents will barely ever be swinging at you, because they will just lose their creatures in the process to the deathtouch snakes. This card also has the persist mechanic, so whenever this card would die and it didn't have a -1/-1 counter on itself, it will just return to the battlefield with that -1/-1 counter, which already will generate you an additional 1/1 snake token and essentially makes your opponents have to deal with this card twice. And the last card in this section is Carnifex Demon, which honestly really sounds like the name of a metal band. This massive 6/6 flying body will enter the battlefield with 2 -1/-1 counters on itself. And for 1 black mana and removing a -1 counter from this creature, we get to put a -1 counter on each creature on the battlefield, which, as you know by now, will generate us a massive amount of snake tokens and remove our opponent's boards. And due to the fact that we do run a ton of ways to put -1 counters on our Carnifex Demon, we will be able to use this ability a ton of times, just acting as some sort of a board wipe effect and triggering all of our -1 counter synergies in the deck. Be it Hapatra, a Flourishing Defense, a Nest of Scarabs, Carnifex Demon really is the ultimate curve topper creature we play in this deck. Next up we have the Acceleration section. This section covers every card that helps us get out our setup pieces faster. Between regular mana dorks and cards that allow us to turn our snakes into mana, these cards will guarantee us that we will always have a ton of mana to work with and that we can start playing our value engines before anyone even has the time to react. First up, we play 3 1-mana mana dorks, being a Birds of Paradise, a Delighted Halfling, and an Elves of Deep Shadow. Now obviously, since Hapatra is a 2-mana commander, these cards won't actually help us get her out any faster. That being said, whenever you are able to play one of these mana dorks on turn 1, Hapatra on turn 2, you will then have access to 4 mana on turn 3, allowing you to play any of your cards 1 turn earlier. Usually whenever you have one of these 1-drops in your opening hand, you are going to have a really good time. Deathtouch Shaman, and I really like to refer to this card as a 1-mana Golgari Planeswalker, just due to the sheer amount of abilities it has. By just tapping Deathtouch Shaman, we get the option to exile any land card from any graveyard, and we get to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Especially if you are playing in a pot where a ton of the fetch lands are being played, there will always be lands in graveyards. cards, making Deathtouch Shaman function as a 1 mana dork. On top of that, he has 2 other abilities. For 1 black mana and tapping him, you get to exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard and each opponent will lose 2 life. And for 1 green mana and tapping him, you get to exile a creature card from a graveyard and you will gain 2 life. Now both the life loss and the life gain effects on Deathtouch Shaman are pretty nice little abilities, but the real reason why these abilities are good is if your opponents are playing a deck that interacts with their graveyard. If you're playing against a Necrobloom player that wants to return their Field of the Dead from their graveyard to the battlefield, you can just exile it with Deathtouch Shaman and their Wincon is just gone forever. If you're playing against a Megan Reanimator deck and they want to reanimate their Elesh Norn, you can just exile it with Deathtouch Shaman and their Wincon is gone. And if you're playing against a Vivi Spellslinger deck that wants to flashback their Past in Flames to start comboing off and just win the game, you can just exile it and they won't have a way to win the game anymore. If you are in Golgari colors and you do play a couple of fetch lands in your own deck, Deathtouch Shaman will always be an auto inclusion in my opinion. Cryptolith Rite, a 2 mana enchantment that will give all creatures you control an additional ability, and that is that you can tap them to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And obviously with the massive amount of snake tokens that we will be generating in this deck, this simple 2 mana enchantment will provide you with some insane mana production. Even just having 3 little snake tokens on the battlefield will now produce you 3 extra mana. Or later in the game, if you are able to generate 20 snake tokens by using a Black Sun Zenith for example, you will be able to tap all of them for mana and you will just be able to use all that mana to go find one of your Wincons and just close out the game. Wight of the Reliquary, my personal favorite Golgari card ever printed. For 2 mana you get a 2/2 Vigilance Body that will get +1/+1 for every creature in your graveyard. Now obviously later in the game this can actually be a huge creature body for just 2 mana, but that's not the reason why it's included in the deck. The real reason it is included in the deck is because whenever we tap this card and sacrifice a creature, we get to search our library for any land card and put it on the battlefield tapped. Yes, you read that right, it doesn't say basic land, you can go search up any land in your deck. And as you will see later in the land section of this video, 80% of our mana base are actually utility lands. This card enabling you to just go fetch up the utility land you need at the given board state is just ridiculous. Since we will always be generating snake tokens in this deck, we will always have creatures to sacrifice to its effect, really helping us accelerate our mana and just go fetch up any lands we do need at the given time. Elvish Spirit Guide. It's a 3 mana 2/2 creature, but trust me, you'll never be casting this. The only reason it is included in the deck is because you can exile this card from your hand to add 1 green mana to your mana pool. And this card can set up for some really explosive starts because it does allow you to get Hapatra out as early as turn 1, which is absolutely crazy because you'll be able to start swinging with Hapatra, get those -1/-1 counters out, start generating some snake tokens, and this will give you an insane amount of tempo. Usually I don't include any of the fast mana cards in any of my decks, but just the fact that you can play your commander on turn 1 is just way too cool not to do. Enduring Vitality. This card has exactly the same ability as a Cryptolith Rite. You will be able to tap any creature you control to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. The big differences being that this time it will cost you 1 mana more and it is actually an effect on an enchantment creature. But whenever this creature is removed from the battlefield, it will actually return as an enchantment and it won't be a creature anymore, essentially forcing your opponents to have to use 2 removal spells on this 1 card. Warren Soul Trader, one of the best sacrifice outlets ever printed. By paying 1 life and sacrificing a creature, we get to generate an untapped treasure token. This card allows us to start sacrificing our snake tokens and turn them into treasure tokens that we can use for mana to get out any of our Wincons, which is already some really fantastic value. And we also use this card in a couple of infinite loops we play in the deck. Culling Ritual. For 4 mana, we get to destroy every non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less. Then we get to add a mix of black and green mana to our mana pool equal to the amount of permanents destroyed this way. Now Culling Ritual is a card that I am still testing out in the deck and I'm not sure if I'm gonna keep it in. Obviously it is a really fantastic card that helps you deal with any opposing mana rocks, mana dorks, small creatures, token players, and it will generate you a huge amount of mana in the process. The downside being it will also destroy all our own snake tokens, and it will even destroy Hapatra because she only costs 2 mana. In some games it was an absolutely fantastic effect that allowed me to deal with any problematic permanents and generate me a huge burst of mana, which allowed me to then just recast Hapatra again, follow up with a combo piece and win the game on the spot. But in some games this card will just be sitting in your hand and you really won't want to be casting it, because you will just be resetting your own board and sometimes you just don't have anything to do with the huge amount of mana it produces you. And the last card in this section is Grim Hireling. Whenever one or more creatures would deal combat damage to an opponent and you have this card on the battlefield, you get to generate 2 treasure tokens. And since we will always have 1/1 deathtouch tokens available to us that our opponents will never want to block, it is really easy to get a ton of triggers out of this creature and just produces a ton of mana. Due to the way of how this ability is worded, if you actually send 1 snake token to each one of your opponents, you will get 3 triggers and you will actually get to generate 6 treasure tokens. And on top of that, this card also has an activated ability. For 1 black mana and sacrificing X treasure tokens, we can give target creature -X until the end of turn, allowing us to use any treasure tokens we might have as some pinpoint removal for any problematic creature on the battlefield. If you're enjoying these in-depth deck tech videos and you want to support me and the channel, check out the YouTube membership program. As a member, you will get early access to any deck lists before the videos even go live. You will get access to some exclusive member-only chat rooms in the Discord server, and at the highest tier, you can even submit your deck for a personal review by me. The YouTube membership program is the best way to support me directly and help me keep on the lights in the studio. If you want to support, click the big join button below the video or check out the link in the description below. And a huge thanks to all the current YouTube members. Thanks to you, I can keep doing what I love doing most. Build some really good decks. Next up, we have the Drain cards and the Wincons. The cards in this section allow us to convert our snakes, or -1/-1 counters, or any of our infinite loops we play in the deck into actual game wins. Whether it is through draining the entire table at once, just overwhelming them with a ton of snake tokens, or even winning on infect damage, these are your main win conditions in the deck. Blood Artist. Whenever this creature or any other creature dies, target opponent will lose 1 life and we will gain 1 life. And to this day, Blood Artist still remains one of the strongest aristocrat drain cards ever printed. And that is because it triggers off anything. When your opponents are swinging at each other and one of their creature dies, we will get a trigger. Whenever one of our snake tokens would die, we also get a trigger. Whenever we play a huge Black Sun Zenith and we wipe the entire board, we will get a ton of Blood Artist triggers. And whenever we are able to set up an infinite loop in this deck, making infinite snake tokens leave the battlefield, we will just win the game on the spot. Both a creature that will generate us a huge amount of value over the course of the game for what we will be doing anyways, sacrificing snakes and destroying a ton of creatures, and it also functions as an out for any of our infinite loops in this deck. Zulaport Cutthroat. This card has a really similar effect to Blood Artist, but this time it will only triggers whenever this creature or another creature we control dies, and it won't just make one opponent lose 1 life, it will make each opponent lose 1 life. The more of these efficient drain effects we can get in this deck, the better. Talking about drain effects, Vengeful Blood Witch. Once again, a really similar effect to Blood Artist, the difference being that this time it will only trigger whenever a creature we controls would die, making it the least interesting drain outlet in the entire deck, but it does get the job done. Now let's take a break from all of these drain effects and talk about an alternate Wincon we play in the deck. Finn the Fangbearer. For 2 mana, you get a deathtouch body that whenever any creature you control with deathtouch deals combat damage to a player, will give that player 2 poison counters. And if you didn't know how poison counters work yet, whenever any player has 10 poison counters, they instantly lose the game. Now obviously swinging with our snakes isn't the main win condition in this deck, but whenever you don't have any of your combos available to you, and when your opponents have no way to block your snakes, casting a well-timed Fin might just take them out of the game. Bastion of Remembrance. Whenever this 3-mana enchantment enters the battlefield, we get to generate a 1/1 human token. And passively, it has exactly the same effect as a Zulaport Cutthroat. Whenever a creature we controls would die, each opponent will lose 1 life and we will gain 1 life. An additional drain outlet for any of our combos, and the fact that this card is an enchantment might make it really hard to deal with for any of your opponents. Susurian Voidborn, one of the newest and most potent drain outlets we got in the Edge of Eternity set. Same effect as Vengeful Blood Witch. Whenever any creature or artifact you control would die, target opponent will lose 1 life and we will get to gain 1 life. Now paying 3 mana for this type of effect isn't the best deal you'll ever get, but this card has the warp mechanic, meaning instead of paying 3 mana to cast this creature, you can actually cast it for just 1 black mana. The downside being it will be exiled at the end of your turn, and afterwards you will be able to cast it from exile by paying its full mana cost. Now due to the nature of how this deck works, you will only need it around for 1 turn to actually close out the game when you have your infinite loop available. So essentially this is some sort of a drain outlet you can get for just the 1 mana, making it the absolute best one in the entire deck. More about how we actually use all of these drain cards later in the combo section of this video. We finally meet again Sephiroth, Fabled Soldier. Sephiroth really holds a special place in my heart, because to this day my Sephiroth video is still by far the best performing video I have on the entire channel. And probably for good reason, because Sephiroth is an absolutely busted card. Whenever this 3 mana creature enters the battlefield or attacks, we get the option to sacrifice another creature. When we do, we get to draw a card. Already a really solid way to just sacrifice any of your snake tokens and turn them into actual card advantage. And passively, Sephiroth has the exact same effect as a Blood Artist. Whenever any other creature would die, target opponent will lose 1 life and we get to gain 1 life, making him function as an additional drain outlet. And whenever Sephiroth's ability triggers for the 4th time in a single turn, which honestly isn't all that hard to do in this deck, we get to transform him into his backside, which will instantly give us an emblem with the same effect as a Blood Artist. And emblems are cards that you will have for the remainder of the game and your opponents have no way to interact with these, so you will passively have Blood Artist's effect for the rest of the game. And whenever you attack with this transformed version of Sephiroth, you get the option to sacrifice any amount of other creatures. When you do, you get to draw that many cards. A perfect way to ditch any of the snake tokens you don't need anymore and turn them into a huge amount of actual card advantage. And whenever you do sacrifice the snakes, you will get a huge amount of triggers of the Sephiroth emblem. And the last card in this section is the Meat Hook Massacre. Now I didn't just include this card in the deck because I have this really cool foil movie poster variant, but it's included because it is probably one of the strongest black cards ever printed. For 2 black mana plus X you get a legendary enchantment. And whenever this enchantment enters the battlefield, every creature on the board will get -X depending on the mana cost you paid for this. Even though this enchantment will remain on the battlefield, the -X effect will only remain until the end of turn. Now that effect in itself already is a really solid board wipe, but on top of that, this card also has 2 passive abilities. Whenever a creature you control would die, each opponent will lose 1 life. And whenever a creature an opponent controls would die, we get to gain 1 life. Now sadly, we can't use the Meat Hook Massacre in any of our infinite loops because it isn't directly a drain outlet, but in some cases, whenever you are able to sacrifice a ton of your snakes, you will be able to deal a ton of drain damage to all of your opponents. By far one of my favorite cards ever printed, and I really don't understand why it isn't seeing more play. Next up, we have the support section. In this section, you'll find the cards that tie this entire deck together. These are synergy pieces that don't directly ramp or drain your opponents, but they make everything we do in the deck run a ton smoother. Utility creatures, setup tools, tutors. These are the cards that make the deck way more consistent and make sure we have access to the right cards at the right time. Young Wolf, a simple 1 mana creature with the Undying mechanic, meaning whenever this creature would be put into a graveyard and it didn't have a +1/+1 counter on itself, it will just return to the battlefield with the +1/+1 counter. Now obviously this is a really weird inclusion in the deck, but just hear me out. If you didn't know yet, +1/+1 counters and -1/-1 counters actually cancel each other out. So let's say Young Wolf is on the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, and we then are able to put a -1/-1 counter on it, it will count as having no counters on it, which then in turn, whenever the Young Wolf dies, will return it to the battlefield with another +1/+1 counter. This creature basically ensures that we will always have a creature body to stack our -1/-1 counters onto. More about Young Wolf in the combo section later. Collector, oof! For as long as this 2 mana creature is on the battlefield, activated abilities of any artifact can't be activated. And since we only do play 2 artifacts in this deck, this is a one-sided effect. Your opponents won't be able to use any of their mana rocks, they won't be able to use any of their treasure tokens, and if you do have some artifact players in your pot, this simple 2-drop creature just shuts down their deck entirely. The amount of games where I had Collector Oof on the battlefield and my opponents were tapping their soul rings, and I was like, hey, yo, dude, I have Collector Oof on the battlefield, are just insane. It really is a 2-drop creature that can change the outcome of an entire game. Just be warned, we do play some cards in the deck that will generate us treasure tokens, like a Grim Hireling and a Warren Soul Trader. But usually in this type of deck we do play enough board wipes and sacrifice effects to just sacrifice the Collector Oof whenever we need, and we are able to use our own treasure tokens. Diabolic Intent. Whenever we cast this 2 mana spell, we have to sacrifice a creature as an additional cost. When we do, we get to search our library for any card and put it directly into our hand, essentially functioning in the same way as a Demonic Tutor, but we don't play that since I really didn't want to include any game changers in the deck. And the additional cost of sacrificing a creature will never be a problem in this deck because we will always have snake tokens to sacrifice. Fiend Artisan. For 2 mana you get a 1/1 creature that will get +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. Now honestly, you can just ignore the stat boost and the small creature body, it is all about its activated ability. By paying either a green or a black mana +X, tapping this creature and sacrificing another creature, we get to search our library for any creature card with mana value X or less, and we get to put it directly onto the battlefield. And obviously this card is just ridiculous, because once we do have a ton of mana available, we are just able to tap this creature, invest little mana into it, sacrifice one of our snake tokens, and we will be easily able to get any of our combo pieces, mainly Yawgmoth, out on the battlefield and just taking over the game instantly. Time of Need. For 2 mana we get to search our library for any legendary creature and put it directly into our hand. Nothing really too fancy, but it is another really solid 2 mana option to go tutor up our Yawgmoth. And fun fact, it is probably one of the cheapest tutor cards ever printed. So if you are working on some budget decks that are in green, Time of Need really is a card you can consider. Chatterfang. Squirrel General. For 3 mana you get a 3/3 squirrel body with Forest Walk, meaning that it can be blocked for as long as the defending player controls a forest. Since we do play a Yavimaya in this deck, we can actually turn all of our opponent's lands into forest and make the Chatterfang unblockable. Funny little interaction. Now the main reason why Chatterfang is such a busted card is his passive ability. Whenever any sort of tokens would be created under your control, you get that many tokens plus 1 additional 1/1 squirrel token. Generate snakes with Hapatra, get additional squirrels. Generate treasure tokens with your Warren Soul Trader, get additional squirrels. And obviously these tokens can be used in the same way as we can use the snake tokens. You can generate a ton of mana by using Cryptolith. They will trigger all the drain effects in our deck whenever they die, and they do make for really good targets to put additional -1/-1 counters on. And this ability also enables a ton of additional infinite loops in this deck, which I will be going over later. And Chatterfang doesn't stop there, because he also has an activated ability for 1 black mana and sacrificing X squirrel tokens. When you do, target creature will get +X, -X until the end of turn. A perfect way to just turn the squirrel tokens he generates into additional pinpoint removal you can use to destroy any creature on the battlefield. Chord of Calling. For 3 green mana +X, we get to search our library for any creature card with mana value X or less and put it directly onto the battlefield. Now Chord of Calling would be an absolutely horrible card, but it has the Convoke mechanic, meaning whenever we cast it, we can tap any creature we control to reduce its mana cost by 1. And we can even use the Convoke mechanic to pay for the 3 green mana pips it has in its cost. We just have to tap green creatures for that. Now in this deck we will always have a huge number of creatures or snake tokens on the battlefield. You can just tap them, cast a huge Chord of Calling and go fetch up any of your combo pieces. Be it a Drain Outlet, a Yawgmoth, a Chatterfang, whatever combo piece you need to just close out the game on the spot. Eldritch Evolution. Another card that we have to sacrifice a creature to as as an additional cost. And this time we get to search our library for any creature with mana value X plus 2, X being the sacrificed creature's mana cost. And we get to put that creature directly onto the battlefield. You can sacrifice a snake to go fetch up any of your drain outlets. You can sacrifice any of your drain outlets to go fetch up your Yawgmoth. You can sacrifice any of your 1 mana dorks to go fetch up your Warren Soul Trader. And there are many more options available with this card. Just a really excellent tutor option. Scurry Oak, a 3 mana creature with the evolve mechanic, meaning that whenever we play a creature with either greater power or toughness than this creature, this card will get a +1/+1 counter. And whenever any number of +1 counters would be put onto this creature, we get to generate a 1/1 squirrel token. Another really weird inclusion in the deck, but it is included because it is a 2-card infinite combo with Yawgmoth, which I will be explaining in the combo section. And as you could have guessed, because Scurry Oak is included in the deck, we also play an Ivy Lane Denizen. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And when itself, whenever we are creating snake tokens, this creature will trigger and allow us to divide some +1 counters over our board, buffing up our creatures. And as most commander players know, this card is a 2-card infinite combo with the previous card, Scurry Oak. Because whenever a +1 counter is put onto the oak, it will generate us a green squirrel token. Ivy Lane Denizen will then trigger, put another counter onto the oak, and this combo will result in your oak having infinite +1/+1 counters and you getting infinite 1/1 squirrel tokens. Pretty neat little 2-card combo you can run in any of your green decks. Grave Pact. For 4 mana you get an enchantment that whenever any of your creatures would die will make every opponent sacrifice one of their creatures. And this type of effect can get absolutely crazy and just lock some of your opponents out of the game. Since we are a creature token based deck, we will always have a huge amount of bodies on the field. And when you then have ways to make them die, either be it through a sacrifice outlet, a board wipe, or just putting a ton of -1/-1 counters on them, this card will make all your opponents sacrifice all of their creatures. Besiege the Mirror, a 4 mana spell that allows us to go search our library for any card and put it into our hand. And this card also has the bargain mechanic, meaning as we cast a spell we get the option to sacrifice either an artifact, an enchantment, or a token. When we do, if the tutored card has mana value 4 or less, we actually get to cast it for free. And Besiege the Mirror is just the perfect card to go tutor up our Yawgmoth, since that card will cost us 4 mana. And we will always have tokens available to sacrifice to get the benefit from the bargain mechanic. And the last card in this section is Hazel's Brewmaster, a 4 mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield allows us to exile any card from any graveyard. And then we get to generate a food token. Passively, all our food tokens will have all activated abilities of any creature card exiled by this card. Now there's only one reason why this card is included in the deck, and that is because it is a 2-card infinite mana combo when you combine it with Devoted Druid. I will be explaining how this combo works in the combo section later in the video. Next up we have the card draw section. Once Hapatra and all our other engines are running, these are the cards that make sure we never run out of gas. We're generating so many snake tokens that it only makes sense to turn them into pure card advantage. Corrupted Conviction, a simple 1 mana instant speed spell that allows us to sacrifice a creature to draw 2 cards, allowing us to turn one of our snake tokens into what is essentially some free card advantage. Skull Clamp, a classic 1 mana equipment that any commander player knows. You can equip this for 1 mana and the equipped creature will get +1 power and -1 toughness. And whenever the equipped creature dies, you get to draw 2 cards. Now what this card essentially reads is pay 1 generic mana, sacrifice a snake token, and draw 2 cards. And usually in my experience, a Skull Clamp is just a 1 mana card that is able to draw you a gazillion cards. If you for example have 5 snake tokens on the battlefield, which is a really easy thing to do in this deck, you can just pay 5 generic mana, equip this card to all of your snake tokens, and you will be able to draw 10 cards for just 5 colorless mana, which is the best deal you'll ever get. Plum the Forbidden, a 2 mana instant speed spell that whenever we cast this will lose us 1 life and draw us 1 card. But as an additional cost to casting the spell, we can sacrifice any amount of creatures. When we do, we get to copy the spell for each creature sacrificed this way. And this is another perfect card to just turn any of our snake tokens into pure card draw. Cast this for 2 mana, sacrifice 5 snakes, you will lose 5 life and draw 5 new cards. Driven and Despair. This is one of the split cards with the Aftermath mechanic, meaning you can only cast the green part of this card whenever it is in your hand, and you can only cast the black card straight from your graveyard. The first part of this card, Driven, will give all creatures you control an additional line of text, and that is whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. And in this type of deck where we do have a ton of snake deathtouch tokens available to us that our opponents will never ever want to block, this is a fantastic way to draw a ton of cards. After you cast a spell, it does go to your graveyard, and you can instantly even use the Aftermath part of this card. And like the first part, Despair will also give all creatures we control menace and an additional line of text. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, that player has to discard a card. Now just the fact that this part of the card will also give all of our snakes menace makes them even harder to block. And it will almost guarantee that they will connect for combat damage, draws a ton of cards, and as a nice little benefit, our opponents will also have to discard cards. Driven and Despair is a really crazy card for any creature token based deck, and I didn't even know this card existed before making this video. Generous Patron, a 3-mana creature with the support 2 mechanic, meaning whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 creatures. And passively, whenever we would put any number of counters on a creature we don't control, we get to draw a card. And obviously this effect scales perfectly with his support mechanic, because we will be able to put 2 +1/+1 counters on creatures our opponents control, and this card will instantly draw us 2 cards whenever it enters the battlefield. And that in itself is already pretty nice, but whenever we would put a -1/-1 counter on our opponent's creatures, this card will always draw us a card whenever we do so. And the amount of draw potential that this card has is absolutely ridiculous. If you have this on the battlefield and you cast a Black Sun Zenith for 1, put a -1/-1 counter on like 10 creatures, this card will draw you 10 new cards. Auto inclusion in any Hapatra deck. Toski, Bearer of Secrets. A 4-mana legendary squirrel that can be countered, has indestructible, and has to attack every combat if able. And all of those abilities make Toski into a really annoying creature to deal with. And whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. An excellent way to just start swinging in with your deathtouch snake tokens, which your opponents don't want to be blocking anyways, and turn that into some solid card advantage. God Eternal Bontu. Whenever this massive menace creature body enters the battlefield, you get the option to sacrifice any number of permanents and then draw that many cards. One of the best ways in this entire deck to just draw a gazillion cards and refill your entire hand. You can sacrifice all your snake tokens to this, you can sacrifice treasure tokens to this, you can sacrifice any mana dorks you don't need anymore, and later in the game you can even start sacrificing your lands if you really desperately need some card draw. One thing is for sure, Bontu will always draw you a ton of cards and trigger all your drain effects you play in the deck. And whenever Bontu dies or he is exiled, we get to put him into our library 3rd from top, meaning that he will always just keep coming back, drawing you new and new cards. A fantastic card for when you get into some really grindy games. And the last card in this section is Seshiro the Anointed, which is probably one of the only snake tribal lords I have ever seen. For 6 mana, you get a creature that will give all other snakes you control +2/+2, turning all of our 1/1 deathtouch snakes into 3/3 deathtouch snakes, which means whenever you do have a significant amount of snakes on the battlefield, you can actually use this card as some sort of a Wincon and just win on combat damage. And its last passive ability is essentially the same as Toski. Whenever a snake deals combat damage to one of your opponents, you get to draw a card. So your opponents can choose, or they let your snakes through and you will get to draw a ton of cards of them, or they block your deathtouch snakes with some of their valuable creatures and they will lose their board in the process. Before we move on, a quick shout out to Sheddington in the Panzer MTG Discord server. He actually made a full overview of every color pair I already featured on the channel. Apparently I still haven't made a Rakdos, a Dimir or a mono white deck. And what way to better fill those gaps than building a new Appa deck or an Ozai the Phoenix King deck from the new Avatar set we're gonna get soon. Or who knows, maybe next year when the new Lorwyn set comes out, we might get a new cool Dimir Fairy commander. Either way, I have been on a mission to fill the missing color gaps. So no matter what color combo you like playing, there will be a Panzer video on the channel for you. Next up, we have the protection and interaction section. Considering how strong Hapatra is, you will become the table's biggest target. This section will make sure your board, and especially Hapatra, actually survive long enough to take over the game. We got some key protection pieces to safeguard our setup, and some really good removal to disrupt our opponent's game plans. Revitalizing Repast. For 1 hybrid mana, you get an instant speed spell that will put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and make it indestructible until the end of turn. A perfect way to protect your Hapatra from any sort of spot removal or any sort of board wipe. And if you don't need a protection piece, you can just play the backside of this card, which is a land that taps for either a black or a green mana and enters the battlefield tapped. Assassin's Trophy, a 2 mana instant speed spell that allows you to deal with any permanent. The controller of that permanent will get to search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield. But honestly, dealing with any sort of problem and just giving a basic in return will always be a really good deal. You can target problematic artifacts, problematic creatures, and you can even target lands with an Assassin's Trophy, making it into one of the strongest removal spells ever printed. Cankerbloom, a 2 mana creature we can sacrifice for 1 generic mana to get one of 3 options. Allows us to destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or it allows us to proliferate. And all 3 of the options on this creature are absolutely fantastic. It deals with our opponent's boards, or it allows us to get even more -1/-1 counters, removing or debuffing our opponent's creatures and generating us a ton of snakes. And since you don't have to tap this creature to use the ability, you can just drop it and instantly sacrifice it for any of its effects. Collective Resistance. For 2 mana, you can either destroy target artifact, target enchantment, or give a creature you control hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. Like I mentioned with the previous card, all the options on this one are fantastic. Especially the last part, which essentially makes Hapatra untargetable and unremovable until the next turn. And this card also has the Escalate mechanic, meaning whenever you cast it, you do get the option to pay an additional 2 green mana, and every green mana you pay allows you to choose an additional option. A 2 mana protection or removal spell, or a 4 mana spell that will generate you an insane amount of value. Golgari Charm. For 2 mana on instant speed, you can either give all creatures -1/-1 until the end of turn, which is a perfect way to deal with any sort of creature token based decks. You can destroy target enchantment, some really solid interaction, or you can regenerate every creature you control, which is a really good way to protect Hapatra from spot removal or your entire board from any sort of board wipes. As you can see, all of the interaction spells in this deck do have multiple options, and that's what makes Magic cards go from good to great. Heroic Intervention. For 2 mana on instant speed, you get to give every permanent you control hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn, protecting you from spot removal, from board wipes, and it even protects your lands and enchantments from being interacted with. Bridgeworks Battle. For 3 mana, you can give any of your creatures +2/+2 and it will fight target creature you don't control. And since we will be generating deathtouch snake tokens, whatever creature they get in combat with will always be destroyed, making this act as a really solid removal spell. And if you don't need a removal spell, you can just play the backside, which is a land that taps for 1 green mana and even enters the battlefield untapped for the low cost of 3 life. Like I mentioned in all my videos, there really isn't any reason not to include these MDFC land cards in your decks. Deadly Rollick. For 4 mana on instant speed, we get to exile target creature. Now paying 4 mana to exile a creature really isn't all that efficient. But whenever we control our commander, we can actually cast a spell without paying its mana cost. Now in my opinion, all the cards that cost 0 mana whenever you control your commander are absolutely broken and should be banned in the format. That being said, since we do play a 2 mana commander which we will control 99% of the time, this card is just way too good not to include in the deck. Spell the Profane. Another 4 mana removal spell that allows us to destroy any target creature or planeswalker. Really horrible value, but later in the game this might function as an additional removal spell. Most of the time you will just be playing the backside of this card, which is a land that taps for black mana and enters the battlefield untapped for the low cost of 3. mana. And the last card in this section is Incremental Blight. For 5 mana you get to put a -1/-1 counter on a creature, 2 -1 counters on another creature, and 3 -1 counters on another creature. It will give us 3 snakes thanks to Hapatra, trigger any of the other -1 counter synergies in this deck, and usually you will be able to remove 3 creatures with this effect. The card doesn't look all that good on paper, but trust me, when you are playing this deck, it is a really good card. Next up we have the lands. Since this isn't a budget deck, I must admit the mana base is quite expensive. If you want to cut down on the price of this deck, you can easily replace some of the most expensive lands in this list by just regular basic lands. Since we are just a 2-color deck, basic lands are perfectly fine in this list. Being in black and green gives us access to some of the best utility lands ever printed. I'll start by going over those. Access Tunnel. For 3 mana and tapping this land, we can make any creature with power 3 or less unblockable for the remainder of this turn. And since Hapatra's first ability will trigger whenever you deal combat damage, this is a perfect way to ensure you can get combat damage through and get that -1/-1 counter. Boseiju Who Endures. You can discard this land for 2 mana to activate its channel ability, allowing you to destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land target opponent controls. They will then get to search their library for a card with the basic land typing and put it onto the battlefield. Just the fact that Boseiju is a land which essentially has no downsides to including in the deck and giving you an additional way to deal with any problematic permanents on the field is just fantastic. The cost of channeling this card is even reduced by 1 generic mana for every legendary creature you control. And since we will always be controlling Hapatra, you can always use this effect for just the 1 green mana. Forbidden Orchard. A land that taps for mana of any color, but whenever you do tap this land, target opponent will get to create a 1/1 token, which in this deck is actually a good thing for us, because it will give us an additional target to stack -1/-1 counters on and get even more Hapatra triggers. Grasping Dunes. For 1 mana and sacrificing this land, we get to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. A really simple ability, but later in the game it might actually make the difference by generating you an additional snake token, or just by getting one of our infinite loops started. Ifnir Deadlands. This land is basically the big brother of the previous card, because now you have to pay 4 mana and sacrifice it to put some -1/-1 counters on any creature, but in return this land will also enter the battlefield untapped and you will be able to tap it for black mana. Grim Backwoods. You can pay 4 mana, tap this land, sacrifice a creature, and you will get to draw a card. A really solid way to generate you some card advantage by sacrificing your snake tokens, which will come in really handy, especially in your grindier games. Karn's Bastion. For 4 colorless mana and tapping this, we get to Proliferate, which in a board state where your opponent's creatures already have -1/-1 counters on them will translate into us generating a gazillion snake tokens. Correction Tower. A land that can be tapped to sacrifice a creature and add 2 black mana to our mana pool. A really good sacrifice outlet which we can toss our snake tokens onto and essentially have a land that will produce us 2 mana, which will allow us to play all of our cards 1 turn earlier. Shizo, Death's Storehouse. For 1 black mana and tapping this land, we get to give target legendary creature we control fear until the end of turn, meaning that it can only be blocked by other black creatures or artifact creatures. Another fantastic land that will basically ensure that we will always be able to get combat damage through with Hapatra. Westvale Abbey. For 5 mana, tapping this land and sacrificing 5 creatures, we get to transform it into its backside, which is a massive 9/7 flying, lifelink, indestructible haste creature. Now the main reason this land is included in the deck is because it is a land that will allow us to sacrifice our creatures and trigger any of our drain outlets in the deck. But I suppose the backside of this card is actually a really huge creature body that will gain you a ton of life and will deal a ton of damage to your opponents. Urborg and Yavimaya. Both of these lands will make every other land on the battlefield have the basic swamp or forest typings. These cards are mainly included in the deck because we will be able to tap any of our lands, even the ones that only produce colorless mana for any of our colors. The lands are really expensive and you don't really need them in the deck, but they do help a ton with our color fixing. And for the regular mana producing lands in this deck, we play 3 of the fetch lands, a Blooming Marsh, a Command Tower, a Pain land, 1 of the Horizon lands, a Shock land, a Filter land, a Survey land, a Bond land, a Verge land, a Check land, and for basics we play 2 swamps and 2 forests. And now for the part that everyone has been waiting for, the combo section. Here I'll be breaking down the main combo loops in the deck, how they work, what pieces we need, and how they actually win us the game. And if you want to see every single combo line in this deck written out in full detail, go check out the Moxfield primer. All the combos are listed there with really in-depth explanations. I'd actually recommend you watch this full combo section first so you get a good visual understanding of how the combos work, and then going over the written primer at your own pace so you really get a good understanding of how all the combos truly work. The first and the most obvious combo line in this entire deck is a variation on the Hapatra plus Yawgmoth combo. And for this combo to happen, you will need the following 3 things. You will need either Hapatra, a Nest of Scarabs, or a Flourishing Defense on the battlefield. You'll also need a Yawgmoth on the battlefield, and one of the 6 drain outlets that I mentioned, and I will be using a Zulaport Cutthroat in this example. You start this combo by activating Yawgmoth for 1 life and sacrificing one of your snake tokens. The snake token hits your graveyard and Zulaport Cutthroat's ability will trigger, making every opponent lose 1 life and you will gain 1 life. Then you resolve Yawgmoth's trigger, actually putting the -1/-1 counter on the creature an opponent controls and drawing a card. Hapatra will then trigger because you just put a -1/-1 counter on a creature and you will get to create a new snake token, which you can then again sacrifice to Yawgmoth's ability and just repeat the loop from there. And this combo will result in a couple of things. You drawing an infinite amount of cards, infinite life loss on your opponents and infinite life gain for us, and wiping your opponent's entire boards. Now I can already hear you thinking, how does this win me the game if my opponents don't control any creatures anymore? And that's where our really simple 1-drop creature Young Wolf comes in. Because thanks to its Undying ability, we will be able to stack an infinite amount of -1/-1 counters on it. So even though our opponents don't have any creatures anymore to actually put the counters on, we will always be able to put them onto the Young Wolf and just make the loop go infinite and drain out the entire table. Young Wolf will completely remove the need of our opponents having to control creatures to make this loop work. For the next combo line, you will need 5 things. Either Hapatra, Nest of Scarabs, or Flourishing Defense on the battlefield, a Blowfly infestation on the battlefield, any one of our 6 drain outlets, at least 2 snakes, and a way to put at least 1 -1 counter on any creature you control. You start off this combo by putting a -1 counter on any of the snakes you control. The creature will then die and your drain outlet will deal 1 damage to all your opponents and you will gain 1 life. You will then get 2 triggers. First up, you'll get a Hapatra trigger, and then you will get a Blowfly infestation trigger. First, we will resolve the Hapatra trigger, generating us a new 1/1 snake token. Then we will resolve the trigger of the Blowfly infestation and put a -1/-1 counter on the snake we just created. The snake will then again die, trigger our drain outlet, and we can just keep the loop going from there. And this combo will result in us getting infinite triggers on our drain outlet and just draining out the entire table and winning us the game on the spot. For the next combo line, you will need 3 cards. Either Hapatra or a Flourishing Defenses on the battlefield, an Ivy Lane Denizen on the battlefield, and a Devoted Druid. You start this combo off by tapping the Devoted Druid to add 1 green mana to your mana pool. Then you activate Devoted Druid's other ability, put a -1/-1 counter on it, and you get to untap it. Hapatra will then trigger and you will get to generate a 1/1 snake token. The snake will enter the battlefield and this will trigger Ivy Lane Denizen, allowing you to put a +1/+1 counter on your Devoted Druid. Since you now have both a +1 counter and a -1 counter on your Druid, these will actually cancel each other out. And you can just keep going from there. Add another -1 counter on the Druid, get another snake, get another +1 counter, and this combo will result in you having an infinite amount of green mana and an infinite amount of snake tokens. For the following combo, you will need 4 things. A Scurry Oak without any +1/+1 counters on it on the battlefield, a Yawgmoth in your hand, at least 2 other creatures, and 1 of your drain outlets. You start this combo off by casting Yawgmoth straight from your hand. When he enters the battlefield, you will get an evolve trigger of Scurry Oak. You can then hold priority and activate Yawgmoth's ability by sacrificing 1 of your snake tokens. Your snake token will leave the battlefield and your drain outlet will deal 1 damage to each opponent and you will gain 1 life. Then the Yawgmoth trigger resolves and you get to draw a card and put a -1/-1 counter on the Scurry Oak. Then you will resolve Scurry Oak's Evolve ability, putting a +1/+1 counter on it, and you will get a trigger on its second ability, trying to generate you a squirrel token. You then hold priority once again and sacrifice another snake token. Blood Artist triggers again, and Yawgmoth will put another -1/-1 counter onto the Scurry Oak, and you will get to draw another card. Then the Scurry Oak's second ability, which was still on the stack, will now resolve and generate you a 1/1 squirrel token. Since the Oak is now essentially at 0 power due to the -1/-1 counter, the squirrel will enter the battlefield and Scurry Oak's Evolve ability will trigger again. And you can now just keep sacrificing the squirrel tokens to Yawgmoth, triggering Scurry Oak's ability, and this combo will result in infinite drain to the entire table and you drawing an infinite number of cards. For the next combo you will need 3 things: a Chatterfang on the battlefield, a Warren Soul Trader on the battlefield, and one of your 6 drain outlets. You start this combo by sacrificing a snake token to Warren Soul Trader. Your Cutthroat will trigger and each opponent will be drained for 1 life and you will gain 1 life. Warren Soul Trader will then give you a treasure token, and thanks to Chatterfang you will get to generate an additional squirrel token. You can then sacrifice the generated squirrel token, your drain outlet will trigger again, and you will get a new treasure token and a new squirrel token. And this combo will result in you draining out the entire table and you generating an infinite amount of treasure tokens, aka infinite mana. And for the last combo line we play in the deck, you will only need 2 things: a Devoted Druid either on the battlefield or in your graveyard, and a Hazel's Brewmaster in your hand. If the Devoted Druid is on the battlefield, you can just activate it as many times as you need to actually make it die and go to your graveyard. Then you cast the Hazel's Brewmaster from your hand and you target the Devoted Druid in your own graveyard. The Brewmaster will then generate you a food token, which thanks to its passive effect will have the exact same activated abilities as the Devoted Druid, meaning we can tap it for 1 green mana and we can untap it by putting a -1/-1 counter on it. And since the food token is just an artifact and not a creature type, it doesn't actually care about the number of -1/-1 counters it has on itself. It will never go to the graveyard due to a reduction of its toughness, meaning you can just tap the food token to add 1 green mana to your mana pool, put an irrelevant -1/-1 counter on it, untap it, tap it again, and you can just keep repeating this and it will produce you infinite green mana in the process. And that's it for my take on Hapatra Vizier of Poisons, the true queen of -1/-1 counters and infinite value. This deck is the living proof that an 8-year-old commander can still outcombo, outvalue, and outgrind any other modern day Golgari commander. If you enjoyed this deck, comment a snake emoji so I know you made it to the end of the video. Hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon. I upload one of these awesome in-depth deck videos every single week, and that way you will make sure you don't miss a single one. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in next week's video.